Hello and welcome. A surprise visit in Kiev and what's happening with the Russian invasion? Has it even started yet or is it already petering out? This and more in this situation report. US President Biden has done a surprise visit to Kiev where he met with Zelensky. The US, according to reports here, the US have informed Russia that Biden is going to be in the Ukrainian capital to obviously prevent something from happening, expecting that Russia will be too afraid to do any attack on Kiev with the US president being there. There was an air raid siren, an air raid alarm while Biden was in Kiev, and it's by now expected that this might have been some kind of PR stunt, that actually the Ukrainian side might have done this to help Biden to appear tougher or something like this. At least those are the rumors that are being spread around, but it seems highly unlikely that this was a serious a serious attack on Kiev, that something was actually on the way after the US having informed Russia in advance. Russia, at the same time, is now claiming that Ukraine has moved nuclear material and is preparing a false flag attack to discredit Russia ahead of a meeting of the UN. That and According to Russia, Ukraine will claim that Russia has violated the Convention for Nuclear Security ahead of this. There's obviously no proof whatsoever of this as of now, and we can just see if something at all is happening. But interestingly enough, Ukraine is now, for once, being accused of a false flag attack that is in the making. On the Eastern Front, we have Igor Strelkov, Igor Girkin, who claims here that we see it's translated with Google, that Russians have crossed the border in Kharkiv and have occupied two towns along the border. There is no information whatsoever where that attack was supposed to have happened. There is no confirmation that it actually did happen. We don't know anything, just that Strelkov so far has been more or less reliable, somewhat reliable in the past. So it might be true, it might not be true. Other than that, further fighting is happening around Dvorichna. The Ukrainians are saying they defeated an attack close to Ryanikivka, which is here. Other than that, we see no further advances, and there are even some claims that Ryanikivka is not yet in Russian hands, though I cannot fully confirm this. And we get a visit from the stream technician, who apparently decides when it's time for me to do the recording to come to us. So let's hope he won't sabotage too much of it. Other than that, we've seen attacks in Chervono-Popivka and Kremina. No successes confirmed here. Chervono-Popivka is down here, and Kremina, the attacks are continuing. Also attacks in the direction of Torske and Zarichne. We don't see any further Ukrainian losses of territory in this region. So more or less, the situation is stable as of now north of the Siversky Donetsk. South of the Siversky Donetsk, we have reports of further attacks, Russian attacks on Bilohorivka. They seem to have been without any success. Along the southern Bilohorivka, though, we have some reports about Russian successes. The Russians have advanced further northwest from the town here. They also achieved some minor successes close to Rostolivka, which is here, so in the direction north of Bakhmut, from Soledar north in the direction of Siversk. Other than that, they are also advancing at Zalisnyanske, which is... Zalisnyanske was here. So there are some reports of Russian successes in this direction that seem to be true. They are also achieving additional territorial gain south of Paraskovivka. They have reached Yahidne now. I cannot confirm that they actually captured it already, but they are definitely at the border of the town, pushing in the direction of Bakhmut from the north, and obviously increasing the threat of encirclement in the near future. Other than that, we have reports of Russian successes close to Ivanivske. That should be this area here. The hills here supposedly are still under Ukrainian control, or again under Ukrainian control from the last counterattack. But this road is not blocked with physical presence of the Russian, even though it's probably fully under Russian fire control, at least close to Ivanivske. Other than that, further south at Avdiivka, we have reports of further attacks, both in the north in the direction of Vesele and Novo Bakhmutivka, as well as to its southwest in the area of Pervomaiske, where I cannot confirm additional Russian successes. In Marinka, further fighting is continuing. The Russians are claiming they gained some ground in the north of town, but I can also not confirm this. Vuhledar is still contested. The fighting continues there, but it seems that they have not achieved anything over the last few days. There are currently rumors being spread of huge Ukrainian counterattacks that are happening, but they are mostly from an account. They seem to originate from an account that I don't trust anymore, as it has proven in the past to mostly spread pro-Ukrainian fantasies. So there might be a chance that within the last few hours there are significant counterattacks around Bakhmut, but I cannot confirm that they are actually happening. Just in case you hear it later, it might have been, but the source I have is highly unreliable for that. On the southern front, the Russian, according to Russian sources, they attacked in the direction of Novodanilivka. I cannot confirm that anything happened there, that the Russians achieved any success whatsoever there. Other than that, further commando activity along the Dnipro, the usual stuff, both sides more or less accusing the other or saying that the others tried to cross, that they defeated it, or they claim that they have crossed and destroyed something. So more or less there is some activity, but no serious activity. And I have something interesting for you. The Ukrainian General Staff is writing in its current, in its 2-day-old report that the Russians are bombarding their own territory that they hold along the Dnipro to create hatred towards the Ukrainians. Those accusations are coming now and then. The Ukrainians usually accuse the Russians of this. Usually I don't report it because I cannot confirm it, and it feels kind of ludicrous. It's not completely out of the realm of possibility that the Russians would do that to force the Ukrainian civilians away from the Dnipro, where we've talked about in past situation reports in depth how the Russians are trying to resettle Ukrainians from Zaporizhzhia, from Kherson, but I have no confirmation whatsoever, and it could be pure propaganda from the Ukrainian side that they claim it was the Russians whenever they shelled a border town to make sure that in case some civilians die, the Russians are being blamed. I simply have no way of confirming it, and while it's not out of the question that it's possible, we don't have any proof whatsoever that this is actually happening. Just so if you listen here, I'm not denying you the accusation from the Ukrainian General Staff. I just am doubtful that this is true because I cannot confirm it, and so take it with a big grain of salt. Generally, when it comes to the situation along the front line, we have some interesting news about the offensive. Michael Kaufman, who is a Russia expert that I can really recommend, especially when it comes to military matters, said in a podcast on War on the Rocks that the winter offensive has already begun weeks ago with the attacks on Vuhledar, which is here. He's by that basically claiming or confirming what we talked about in the past situation report, that it increasingly looks like the offensive is already rolling, even though it kind of petered in instead of petered out. So we don't really know about that. What we do have in information about the Russians is that they have returned to their doctrinal structure. In the past, we talked about the fact that the Russians have changed to ad hoc formations, as the battalion tactical groups don't seem to have worked in the past. So they more or less created ad hoc units that they threw against the front line. This seems to be over now. The units are now being used coherently together. So divisions, brigades, regiments down to battalions are being used together as they are initially, as their initial concept is, which shows that the Russian armed forces are fully returning to their doctrine, which makes perfect sense in regards to that Gerasimov has now taken control over the Russian front line after the Russian army has failed so much. And the doctrine, including the battalion tactical groups, all basically carries the signature of Gerasimov. So he must believe that this was a good concept. And if his units have not used it, it makes perfect sense from him to force them to return to the doctrine he devised, that he basically signed off on, to go back to the concept of waging war the Russian way as he devised it, as the conclusion would then be that it was done wrong, not that the concept itself was wrong. This is one of the many changes we see on the Russian side along the front line in the past 2 months or so since Gerasimov has taken over, that his clear attempts to reorganize the troops and to get it under control again, increase the structure, cohesion, etc. And with this, the effective combat readiness and combat effectiveness. Several units, though, even though we hear the units that they are on the front line, the problem is the rest is far from clear. Now we have one thing, that several units are currently not on the front line, and there's a big debate among the analyst community whether the reason for this is that they're being held back as reserves, which is quite a possibility. So among those are significant tank units, that those might be held back until a weak point is identified, and then the tank units will try to push through. Or the other interpretation I read is that those units have suffered such tremendous losses that the Russians have struggled to re-equip them, and the units are simply not along the front line because they are not reconstituted and still are more or less in disarray and crushed. Especially the tank units of the First Guard tank army are missing. That has been destroyed more or less twice, initially close to Chernihiv, and then in the Balaklia offensive by the Ukrainians, they have more or less destroyed the First Tank Guards army completely. So the question is, have they reconstituted them and are now holding them in reserve, or were they not able to equip them fully again? And other than that, the 6th Army is also still mostly missing along the front line. Even though now we have reports that the 12th Tank Regiment of the First Guards Tank Army has been seen in Kupiansk here. In the did I say Kupiansk? In Kremina. But the position of the 90th Tank Division, other bigger parts of the First Guards Tanks Army, the 20th Combined Arms Army, the 29th, 5th, 31st, and 35th and 36th Army are also not known. So regarding to which analysts you're reading, either the Russians have already committed everything they have, and that is confirmed by the British Ministry of Defense. They are saying the Russians basically have already thrown everything they have along the front line. Either you listen to those, or you listen to the others who say we don't know where these and these and these and these units are, including several armies, and they might be a reserve that is being used in an offensive. So we have the interesting situation now that I cannot tell you whether the Russian offensive is currently failing, is currently petering out because they've used everything they have, or whether the Russians have significant reserves to create and then use a breakthrough, which is obviously a massive difference in the conclusions we can take out of this analysis. Unfortunately, I cannot tell you more than this, that then depending on which analyst you want to believe, you have your informations now. As somebody who takes his own conclusions but reads what the others say and write, I cannot say which of the two is more likely to the truth. Unfortunately, I think we'll just have to watch whether this was actually all the Russians can do, or whether they have significant reserves to push further in. In the Crimea, we have reports from the Russians who said they finished the examination when it comes to the attack on the Kerch Bridge. They say it was a terrorist attack by Ukrainian special units. And obviously, in case it was a Ukrainian attack, there are some claims that it might not have been. But in case it was a Ukrainian attack, it would not be a terrorist attack, no matter what the Russians are saying. The Kerch Bridge is a legitimate target in a war between Ukraine and Russia. So should the Ukrainians have attacked it, then it would be a legitimate act of war and not an act of terrorism. When it comes to the mobilization, we have more confusing news. So military bloggers were spreading that the speaker of the DNR troops, Eduard Bazurin, was fired. This was supposed to happen in the context of the integration of the DNR and LNR forces of the so-called People's Republics into the Russian armed forces. And in that context, also, the mill bloggers were saying that Russia is going to replace all the commanders of those units with regular Russian officers that have had the proper education to be an officer, while the DNR and LNR forces were often led by locals, militiamen, self-taught, etc., by what they found to lead units there. And the mill bloggers were outraged about that, telling that the units have commanders that are well versed fighting Ukrainians, that have experience, and whether or not they fail some fitness tests of the Russian army and whether or not they have been in some classrooms doesn't change the fact that they do their job and that they are qualified to do that, etc. And Prigozhin joined in with this and said that it's unacceptable and it must be fake news. And at least a day later, the Russian Ministry of Defense kind of claimed that it supposedly is fake news. They are now saying it isn't true, and neither the speaker nor the commanders are being replaced. We cannot say here if this is the truth, if the Russian army has rolled back its decision after the outcry from the mill bloggers, or if not. Unfortunately, I'm also not able to tell you this. Mill bloggers was also saying that there are still problems with the monetary payments. I scroll down now. You have it full here. You can pause it and read it yourself. They are saying there's still trouble with the payment for fighters. Among those problems is that volunteers didn't get any proof that they actually fought, so they don't get anything in writing, which they need to claim veteran benefits. And in other places, they say mobilized persons that were wounded don't get the paperwork to acknowledge that this was actually a wound that they suffered while fighting in Ukraine, which would also give them veteran benefits and obviously benefits in the context of having been wounded in war. This mill blogger here expects an explosion, as he calls it here, when it comes to the discontent, and obviously in the context, if this becomes a general problem that people see that they have to fight, they are being used as cannon fodder, they are suffering heavy losses, and then those that are wounded and survive don't even get benefits. That should not be good for the Russian morale in the context of this war. On Twitter, we have a translated phone call that was recorded with Prigozhin. It was spread on Telegram channels close to Prigozhin, and according to that, it says that he get the question about ammunitions, unfortunately, stay completely unresolved. So according to that, Prigozhin was not able to gain ammunition for his fighters, which might be the reason why they redeployed to Zaporizhzhia, because without ammunition you can't fight too well, and in Zaporizhzhia there is currently not much fighting, so that might be a reason for the movement of the Wagner fighters. In the political sphere, we have news that the commanders of the Western and Eastern military districts were in Russia were promoted to colonel generals, and Kadyrov publicly congratulated them and said that Chechen formations will follow the orders from every commander that Putin set up, basically again confirming his loyalty, which is kind of obviously in context with the accusations that are being spread from opposition figures, as we mentioned in the last situation report, that Russia might have had some kind of coup attempt, like not to take fully over the government, but to take over the military by Prigozhin, Surovikin, and Kadyrov, which would perfectly fit into that context, that he publicly now swears fealty, more or less, to Putin. And the new prime minister of Moldavia has declared Transnistria, that is currently being spread around widely, that Transnistria needs to be demilitarized and that the Russian soldiers have to disappear. Transnistria is this part of Moldova here. The thing is, though, if you read what is being spread around, he's not saying we need to invade and kick out the Russians and disarm the Transnistrian. He says that it needs to be demilitarized. He's not asking for an invasion or demanding it, but he's saying the Transnistrians themselves should also not be armed. That doesn't mean that we see a joint Moldovan-Ukrainian invasion into Transnistria anytime soon, but it shows that the Russian attempts that were the attempts to stage a coup in Moldova that were the accusation appeared a week ago, that those attempts, if they happened, Moldova says they foiled the plot. If it happened, it has backfired a lot because the new prime minister is also staunchly pro-Western, pro-EU, and anti-Russian in Moldova. And we have one news here from Reuters is that the Russians are targeting Netherlands North Sea infrastructure. The Dutch intelligence agency said a ship was in its wind parks and was trying to snoop around there and had to be escorted out, but they couldn't do any sabotage as of now. So it might be some oversensibility, but at least it smells kind of fishy, even though, to be perfectly honest, sabotaging a wind park would not be in my first on page 1 of my playbook when it comes to sabotaging a NATO nation. But as said, this is being spread by the Dutch and Reuters. And when it comes to international support, we have news that the Dutch are also sending Patriots. The talk is about 2 TELs, transporter erector launchers, and they will have to be embedded in a battery from another nation, likely in the German battery that is being sent, as Germany has sold those launchers to the Dutch, and so they are compatible, fully compatible, and to work together. But the Dutch are participating, and from Ukraine we have reports they expect the first 50 tanks from the West to be fully operational in April. And finally, there were reports that the US Foreign Minister Blinken, State Secretary, has talked to Elon Musk about the usage of Starlink by Ukraine, but we don't have any news about what the results of the talks are. But as you surely know by now, Elon Musk has taken it, seen as problematic that Ukraine started using Starlink to control drones, famously among those the naval drones that had a Starlink receiver and were obviously controlled with Starlink sets to ram into Russian ships. That's it from me for now. Now it's up to you. What do you think? Will the problem with Elon Musk be resolved? Will the US government pressure Elon Musk and SpaceX far enough so they will keep allowing Ukraine to use Starlink for military purpose, for direct offensive, if you want to see it this way, military purpose? Leave your comment, leave your opinion in the comment section, and if you like the video, please hit the thumbs up button. This channel is only possible because of the support from viewers like you. If you like to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. Thank you very much to everyone already supporting the channel, and if you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon so you don't miss future videos, and recommend the channel to your friends and acquaintances. That's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.